Okay. All right. Let's open up this PowerPoint, fancy PowerPoint. Um, yeah, so I had the screen minimized, so I can't see people. So Leanne, you might have to like help me if there's anyone that
Okay.
needs to talk. So, and then if anyone else needs to come in after I've started, you can if you can let them in, you should be able to do that. So yeah, we want to talk about mid-year moves, aka replacements. That's the same thing. Means the same thing. Um, a lot of the information in this training for kind of veteran LC should be familiar information because we build these trainings around, advice and best practices that you guys are developing over time. And for newer LCs, hopefully this will be some good contextual information as well. So we want to start just by talking about what is a mid-year move. The term might be a little confusing sometimes. Why they happen. What's different about a mid-year move versus like the first move, the first family that the student's in that we call the initial placement, and then best practices for mid-year moves and replacements. So hopefully we'll hit all three of those goals today. Mid-year move does not mean a move that happens in the middle of the year necessarily. So it's not like a move that happens in January. A mid-year move is any time a student moves from their original host family. So it could be a move that happens 2 weeks after they arrive. It can be a week before they depart. Anytime that happens, we call that a mid-year move, or a replacement, which might be a less confusing term. And they can happen for any number of reasons. Sometimes mid-year moves are planned in advance. For example, a student arrives to a welcome family and their mid-year move is actually their move to their permanent placement. Mid-year moves can happen even when it was a permanent placement. We all know, if anyone who's been doing this for a long time, we all know that moves, sometimes they happen due to no fault of the host family or the student. The host family could have an illness or a death in the family. A host parent could lose a job. A family member might have to move in and you lose the bedroom. Um, and then sometimes it could be just a bad personality fit, a bad match, or the family realizes maybe they're a little bit too busy to host a student. When there's a personality difference, but the student's behavior is not a problem, we kind of consider that no fault, right? But I think there comes a point when you realize it's just not gonna work. The adjustment is not is not really changing anything. So that might trigger a move. And then, I quite a few times the moves are due to students' behavior. And it might be the host family explicitly asking for the student to be removed, or everyone coming to an agreement, the local coordinator, American Councils, the host family, the student, that it's just not working and the student needs to move for their behavior. Or there could be something that triggers the move that we decide the student has to move, but that's pretty rare. That doesn't happen as often. We just want to kind of normalize it. Like mid-year moves are not inherently bad thing. Um, so typically we want them to happen in the same community that the student's already in, unless there's a reason why it would make sense for them to leave their community, which also happens. Um, we also know that sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, it's hard to find another family in the same school district or the same school. So the student moves communities for that reason. So that happens, to every organization, happens probably every year. Um, and in that case, we just have to help the student adjust to a new community. Um, the times when it makes sense for the student to move to a new community, like consciously, could happen for a couple of reasons. The ones I'm thinking of are, for example, the student had a kind of bad falling out maybe with their previous host family, and they're in the same school as like a host sibling that they lived with that they really didn't get along with, and the student, it might be really awkward for them to stay in that school. They might not really like it there. They might not, feel like they can, maybe they've burned all their bridges in the community with their own behavior and they're not really well supported there anymore. And then, in order to give them a fresh start, they have to, start over somewhere else. So there could be any number of reasons why we would want to move a student to a new community, but more often than not, the goal is to keep them in the same school because we all know that finding school placements is hard any time of year, but it's even harder once school has started. So, and I'll pause at various times and people and ask for, anyone who has anything to add to kind of jump in. The vetting for a host family is the same. Anytime a student moves to a new family, the family has to be vetted the exact same way. They have to do the host family application. We have to have background checks, references, the in-home interview, photos of the home. The only thing that might be different is the student might not need a new school enrollment, right? But they obviously do need a school enrollment if they're changing schools. A couple of other things I want to mention is, again, these are quite rare, but if a host family moves with the student, then we have to have a new in-home interview, for example, because the in-home interview is specific to the home, the physical home that the student and the family live in. So in that case, we need a new in-home interview and new photos. I would even say, we don't need new photos of like the new furniture they get for their living room, but if the student completely changes their sleeping arrangements, maybe they start sharing a bedroom. We would want to see the room they're staying in to make sure they've got a bed. So just kind of keeping those, that's also a type of micro move, I would say. And the other thing, and this can be difficult with the timing, but there does need to be a host family orientation for um, a new host family that's vetted during the year. If they're moving into an already vetted family, maybe into a double placement, then obviously that's not the case. But if they're a new family, they need to have a host family orientation. And we know sometimes that can be tricky because it might be an emergency move that happens like overnight or in a day, in which case, you know, we would just ask that the host family interview or orientation be done, in a timely manner, like as soon as possible, because it's important to help support the family as well. Like the host family orientation is when they get a lot of information to help them be successful as a host family. So we will probably hunt you down for the orientation if we don't get that from you. So this is one of the main differences though. So the vetting of the family is the same, but the promotion of the student can be quite different. So, of course, when the student is still in their home country and they have not entered the United States yet, there are a lot of compliance visa regulations that apply to promotion. You cannot share photos of a student or anything like that with an unvetted host family. Um, but once the student is here in the country, you can. So if a student's already here, you can show photos of the student to a potential host family that hasn't been vetted yet. You can take the student to meet the family. In fact, that is pretty common when the move is in the same community for the student to, they might know the family already. So if obviously they've met them or, the family might want to meet them. We're not asking the student to like sell themselves to a new family, but it just might make sense for them to meet each other. Um, and that is totally fine. The family does not have to be vetted to like meet the student. But you can't like send the student's application with all of their like biographical information to an unvetted family. That is still kind of the same rule. If you're never sure about what you can and can't share with a family when the student's here, then please ask us. But I would just say, photos of the student, meeting the student, fine. Giving their actual paper documents information to them, not fine. Um, the other thing you can't do is you can't use what we call appeals to pity or urgency. It's the same rule we have for any kind of placement before the student even arrives. You can't say something like, even if you're thinking it and worried about it in the back of your mind, you can't come right out and say, we don't get a kid a new family, he's going home. Like that's that would get us in big trouble with the State Department if they were to uh they see that online or something. Um, so for the most part, um, in a lot of ways, promoting a student when they're here is maybe a bit easier because the student can physically go meet people in the community and they're a real person and not just a piece of paper that, the family is looking at. So, anything so far before I go into best practices?
I would
Remember, I can't see hands.
have a comment.
Sure. Yeah, Tanya.
So I had a situation where a student moved in, the family wanted to meet the student
Yep.
and they want to take him out to dinner.
Hmm.
What I was uncomfortable with was no other adult going with the student. I didn't know this family. I'd never
Mm,
met this family. And so I think we should be concerned about just letting an exchange student go off with strangers. I think either the local coordinator needs to sit in on the dinner or the host family. But I think I felt highly uncomfortable with my student just going off with some strangers coming to the host family's house, picking up my
yeah.
student, and then driving away with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would agree with that, Tanya. And I know what situation you're talking about. So I would agree with you in a situation where it's not like a family the student already knows and they just, it's their friend's family and they go over there for dinner anyway. I would agree that like the local coordinator or a host parent or, existing host parent would want to go with them. Especially for the safety of the students since we don't necessarily know those people yet. So
I
I would,
mean, because even in a normal situation, I don't allow my students to go to dinner with strangers. They meet them at festivals.
yeah.
Somebody says, "Oh, we have some Turkish friends. We'll come by and pick you up." And I'm like, sure, you can go as long as the host parent is invited too.
Yeah.
I just, I just, like I said, that situation, I was highly uncomfortable. But anyhow,
Yeah, no, I think that's totally valid. And I'm glad you brought that up because I would agree with you too about like having someone with the student to meet them. And I think a lot of times what is happening is they're meeting the host family might be like, oh, look, there's a basketball game. Like we can meet the family at the basketball game, but everyone's kind of there together and it's in a public place. So, but there's like an adult with them or, the local coordinator is with them when they don't already know the family. So I would agree with that. So thank you for kind of mentioning that. So, anything else people want to add? Go on to best practices. Um, a couple of things I want to mention about school enrollment. So, like I said, the goal is usually to keep the student in the same school. That may or may not happen. But there are a couple of times when the student might be out of school. Um, this usually happens when there's some kind of like emergency move, and the student is going to stay with someone who is either not in the school district, they can't get them to school, um, or something of that nature. That happens again. This happens. Every organization I know of has these situations happen. It's quite. I don't want to say normal, but it happens every year. The goal in that case is we are trying to minimize like how long a student is out of school because um, students being in school is like a compliance thing. So as soon as a student is out of school due to like a host family placement, the State Department is looped in immediately. That is one of the things that triggers their like radar. Um, Normally they're not like tracking student absences, unless there's like a major illness where they're out of, in the hospital and they're out of school for a month or something. A student being sick a couple of times or going on a trip with their host family or, they're going to civ ed or whatever. No one's tracking how many absences they have unless it becomes a problem with the school, right? And it's a behavioral issue. But ECA does track it when they're out of school due to being in a place where they can't get to school. And they don't consider like virtual online school to be a replacement for attending in person. The only time they really ever allowed that was in uh, when the pandemic started and kids were kind of abruptly taken out of school, or when there were still a lot of regulations in place the first year that students came back, and there might be like a couple weeks at a time where students were told to kind of stay home due to being quarantined or whatever. So for the most part, though, we do our best to try to keep them in school. And the other thing that kind of goes along with that is not unenrolling a student. And what we mean by that is the student might have been like removed from a host family or the host family might have kicked the student out, but that doesn't mean even if they can't get to the school, that doesn't mean they're no longer a student at that school. Students have to be enrolled in a high school on a J-1 visa on this program. So we don't want to be in a situation where the student is unenrolled and has no school that they're actually attending in the United States. We're not saying like deceive a school and hide things from them. It's more like just because they're out of this host family doesn't mean we're not actively trying to find them a new family in the same school district. So the intention is to keep them there. Um, so we would just ask that that not happen until a new school is found, if that's the case. Like if we're gonna move them to a new community or even a new school in the same district because they're zoned differently, then that's when you would want to unenroll them. Um, Otherwise, we would ask you please not to do that. Managing the student's relationship with their previous host family. So, um, when the student is moving for no behavioral reason, you know, there's nothing wrong with their relationship with the prior host family. This doesn't really ever come up. The only time this maybe comes up is if they were so attached to their first family, their like welcome family, or even, in other kind of temporary family that they want to talk to them and spend time with them instead of their new family. But for the most part, students can live with their new family and still have a good relationship and stay in touch with the family that hosted them before if there was no reason why they wouldn't, you know, want to stay in touch. We have no problem with that. The time when this comes up that we really want to be careful about is when the student was really unhappy in their previous family and they want to kind of vent about it to everyone they talk to, or they want to gossip about it with their friends. Um, we really want students to be careful about what they're saying about any family they've lived with. Even if we ourselves think the family might have done, uh, they might have been the reason behind the student move. It's really not appropriate for the students to go around and like share personal information about a family or otherwise kind of badmouth them. So they can talk to their natural family at home. They can even talk to their current host family to some extent, although I would still tell them to be discreet about what they share. They can't say like, "Oh man, I had to move because my host brother is going into psychiatric treatment." That's like private information nobody should know, right? Outside of a family. Or, man, my host dad, like, God, his cooking sucked. And like my host sister was so mean to me. Like you wouldn't want them saying negative things about a family that they were living in. So we really ask students to be conscious of that. And we have seen this happen mostly it's either on social media because they think that no one else can see what they post on social media, or they're just gossiping with other students. And exchange students, if they're living with another family in the community, it's gonna be really awkward for the family, right? So we really want students to be careful about that. And more,
Definitely good,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
good for the, they need to be able to talk to their local coordinator to
Yeah,
vent
exactly. I mean, the local
them,
coordinator is
right?
going to know what's going on. So if anything,
Mhm.
talk to the
Mhm.
people that might kind of already know, like people who know what happened. Maybe, you can talk to them. I agree, Leanne. And, in some more sensitive situations, I don't think this happens often, but there are some situations where you might want the student to even limit their contact with that family if the student, uh, for whatever reason, still maybe they didn't get along with one host family member, but they still really liked, the other host parent or something, and they still want to talk to them. There might be times when we might ask the host family to limit their communication, or we might ask the student to limit their communication with that host family. But that's always going to be something that we discuss with the local coordinator. Like these are always decisions that we're talking about with you guys. And there are going to be, things I talk about in this presentation that's like a process or a protocol that might be kind of uniform, but everyone knows that moves always have some unique circumstance to them. So there are things that might change on a case by case basis. So we might make some kind of generalizations that don't apply to every move that we do, but we just want to kind of share what the range of experiences might be. Disclosing, this is a part where I would love for any local coordinators who have dealt with this to chime in on because I think this is one of the trickiest parts of a mid-year move. So when a student, again, I'll keep going back to this. If a student is moving through no fault of their behavior, then it's pretty common for us to give them a letter of expectations, but that is not behavioral. It's a totally neutral letter, it has no ill intention behind it. It's usually like a, hey, it's actually hard to move to a new place. You might have new rules and you might not know what to do, so we're here to support you. That's pretty standard. Um, but if they were literally kicked out of their host family for their behavior or something else, then they're going to have a warning letter or a probation letter, depending on the severity. Um, and we don't want to set the new family up to fail, and we don't want to set the student up to fail in their new family. But we also don't want to you don't want to disclose so much that the family is totally turned off, but you also don't want to like make them think they're, a perfect angel or something is moving into their home. So we know that can be difficult, like knowing how much to disclose when there's and also the family has to know that like the student is on a warning or probation because usually the family has some involvement in it. Like the new family, we might, for example, one of the things in their letter might be, all right, you're moving to a new family, you have to talk about the rules with your family and you have to sign off on them. So like obviously the new family has to be involved in that. Or we might say like every week the student has to submit a report about 5 things they were grateful for to their family. And they submit that to their LC or to us. So we want them actively talking about, or it's like their grades were a problem. So we need their family's help and your help kind of monitoring their grades. So we definitely don't want to hide that they were put on a warning or probation, but there might be ways to frame it in a way that again, doesn't set the placement up to fail. I think the way that we look at it from our perspective is, a disciplinary letter, it is punitive. That's the purpose of the disciplinary action, but it's not meant to make the student, uh, again, feel like they're going to fail. We really are trying to give them strategies or force them into some sort of self-awareness or reflection that might help them change their behavior for the better. And I've seen times when the getting so bad that their host family like kicked them out was maybe like a wake-up call. Even though everyone tried for, maybe we tried for 2 months to tell them if you don't shape up, you're gonna have to move out of this family. They don't think it's ever gonna happen. So the thought of like, oh my God, I have to move to a new family now might get them to reflect a little bit more on what they've been doing. Or it's embarrassing, like that they feel shameful about it because their natural family is upset now. Um, or sometimes, the behavior was a legitimate problem, but it also might have been exacerbated by the conditions that they were in. Maybe there comes a point when everyone in the home is so fed up with each other that the student is not being very mature about how they're handling it, but it was probably never going to get any better, right? And they might have a good chance of doing better elsewhere. But I would love to hear if anyone has any advice on how you framed like a pretty serious behavioral issue for a new family or how you've sold it to a new family without kind of scaring them off. If anyone has any examples. I'm gonna start playing the Jeopardy music. Well, you can think on it. If any of you think on them, you can share them. We also know there are families that literally kind of take in like problem kids. I hate to use that term, but we know there are families that they have a little bit more ability to kind of deal with a behavioral problem, or they think that they can really help straighten out the student's behavior, and they almost like take that on as, something that they're willing to do. And we have definitely seen like students work out in a second family. So we really want to consider it like a second chance. I would say we don't have a lot of early returns, right? So at the end of the day, most of these moves are working out somehow because they're not resulting in the student having to go home. So something's working in the new family, uh, usually.
I tend to ask an experienced host family. That's what I remember doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe a family that's hosted a lot of times with me before, or they've only hosted once or twice with me before,
Yeah.
but I really appreciated how they handled things. And I think so then I already have a relationship with them, so they have a
Yeah.
trust with me too. So then when I, I can talk with them about, this is what happened. This is
Yeah.
my take on the situation. I think that the student should have done this, or the host family really wasn't supporting the student like they needed, or whatever the case might be. Student behavioral issues, like grades, is kind
Yeah.
of a behavioral issue, and sometimes the host family just couldn't support the student. They had too much going on their own in their own lives to be able to, really check and assist the student. Yeah, that's what my first line of defense always was. I I've called I one time I moved a student to another state,
Mhm.
and to a local coordinator in another state hosted my student
Yeah.
because yeah, but most of the time, yeah, to experienced host families that I have a relationship with.
And sometimes like no one knew what was happening, so the behavior escalated to a really bad level that might have been
Mm,
uh it might have turned out differently if the local coordinator. I know sometimes you guys like aren't, doesn't matter how many times you dig, sometimes you're just not aware of, because people want to handle things themselves, without kind of, sometimes I feel like they think they're bothering people by saying, "Hey, we're having a problem," even though that's what our jobs are. So, in that case, like the move might work out because it's like it got so bad because there was no one that was helping them with it. But I agree. Like I think a lot of moves seem to be to like repeat host families. I know not every time. We've definitely had new families take in students that have moved. And I think in that case, the new family is usually like a friend or like a student's friend, like their family. That might be why they're new because they're like, or maybe they're even taking the student. We've even seen them take the student side. I mean, we've put students on warning and had a student like have a friend or a teacher that didn't think that the student even warranted what happened, and they actually almost take the student side in that case, and the warning letter is not a problem for them. But a new family, obviously, you don't want their very first experience hosting sometimes to be a student who just went on warning for breaking their curfew every night or something. So that can definitely be a good strategy. Anything, any others people want to add? I actually don't have much else to share. I mean, that was kind of, again, we wanted to keep these trainings nice and concise. That's why we're having them more frequently, but the topics are smaller. So just to kind of summarize what we talked about, if you joined late or weren't able to catch everything, we talked about mid-year moves, what they are. Any move that happens after a student gets here is a mid-year move, and they happen for lots of different reasons. Sometimes they're totally neutral reasons, sometimes they're the student's behavior. The same vetting applies no matter who the family is, but the promotion rules for students are different. Like the students can meet people or you can show their photos. And then we want to minimize school disruption, whatever that might look like, whether it's a prolonged absence from school or changing schools, and managing those kind of relationships. And then what we just talked about, which is disclosure of behavioral issues and how you can set the new placement up to succeed in a way that is transparent without sharing everything that happened, every little detail that's, every single rule the student broke, for example. So, any questions? I guess I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see everyone's faces. Any questions? Oh, hi, Barbara. I didn't see you join. Wanna...
What do we do with students that it's no fault of their own and we pull them out of school and send them to a different state and it wasn't their fault? What do you provide to support the student? And because the student might become a little depressed, leaving their friends and their school behind and their comfort zone and all the activities they got involved in instead of keeping them in their community. They're now
Yeah.
being pulled out of their community. What support do you recommend?
Yeah, that obviously does happen. That can happen for either because we couldn't either because they were moved on purpose or because maybe we couldn't find a family in the district and they end up having to move. I think in those cases when we know that the student is probably moving out of the community, we always have to balance like if the placement is not confirmed yet, you don't want to provide all the information because it might fall through, right? Kind of like you can't do that when the student's overseas. But you also want to prepare them mentally for the idea that they might be moving. Um, and I think in those cases, first off, we try to give them all the information we can so that they know what they're going into. Try to help identify people who can help them in their new community, like having people at the school that can help welcome them because they're entering the school in the middle of the year. Seeing if they have any say over what classes they're going to take, so they have some continuity in that, and what friends can we help them make? Are there buddies we can set them up with? I think anytime that you have a situation where you can facilitate those kind of relationships, especially when it's like, I think that's why often it's good when it's a kind of experienced family, or they're moving into an existing cluster where there's other students that are there. We want them to move into an existing support network or a support network that's really set up to help them succeed. And like, obviously, they're going to be upset about leaving their old community. Again, unless there was some really extenuating circumstance, we wouldn't, they can still talk to them. We wouldn't tell them, hey, don't talk to your friends back in your old community or anything like that. You could still have a relationship with those people. So I don't know if you've ever had any of those, Leanne, where you've had to kind of, or maybe Alaska has been the the location, probably less often that you move them to, but
No, I used to be, when I worked for States 4-H, I
right.
was the person they called when they needed to move a
Yeah.
student
Up to
in the middle of
Alaska.
the year. Because Anchorage has always been an easy school to get
Mm,
into, like, Anchorage School District. So they would call me, hey, Leanne, I've got this student in Texas, or I've got this student in Arizona, or whatever.
yeah.
And they needed a host family. And this is the situation. So I took in lots of them, and I tended to, if it was a traumatic experience, I had some borderline abuse cases that, where there was like verbal abuse of the student, that sort of thing, where I felt like the kid needed to decompress and have some time with me before they went into the host family. So they stayed with me a few days before they went into the host family, to make sure that they were ready to do that. But most of the time, yeah, the families are excited. So I would just um be there, like, just like at the beginning of the year, I want them to get to know me better. So I would spend time, like take the kid out for ice cream or something like that so they could, you know, have that experience, and I can introduce them to people and experiences, and show them around a little bit, take them for a drive, whatever, spend time with them to get
Yeah.
to know them better. So yeah, if you have to kind of trust that the new local coordinator is going to be there for them when they're moving to another community.
What if it's that they're moving to a new community, but they're within driving distance of their old
Mhm.
community and their old friends? And
I've done that before too.
well, I guess what I'm asking is they go through homesickness,
Hmm.
but it's no
Right.
longer homesickness for their country, it's
Yeah.
homesickness for their friends. So they constantly are trying to make plans to see their friends
Mhm.
in their old community, which may only be 20 minutes away or 15, or it could
Mhm.
only be 5, depending on
Yeah.
how the high school district is zoned. You might have kids, um, at what point do you say, you know, do you restrict them or let them go ahead and continue to kind of live with 2 feet? I mean, 1 foot. I'm sorry, 1 foot in each
Yeah.
community. What we say about, don't call home too much, your
Yeah.
natural parents, but
Mhm.
they can do that here in the United States too.
Mhm.
I think you have to treat it somewhat the same if it's starting to be really disruptive. I think we only notice when it is a problem, if that makes sense. Like when it's a problem, that's when it's on everyone's radar because the student is suddenly not, they don't seem to be bonding at all with their new family or that like they're not even giving that relationship a chance, or they're not really making friends at their new school. Um, but it's still hard to actually see their students at their old school, right? Because maybe it's actually hard to get those for those get-togethers. So I think we have to sort of, it's not like you cut them off because I don't think that helps, and I don't think it's realistic either to, especially with everyone having a smartphone, to cut kids off of contact. But I think you do have to kind of, you know, help them understand why you want them to focus on their new placement and on their new community
Right.
because there could be lots of really cool opportunities that they aren't giving, they're going to miss
Right.
out on if they aren't open to that kind of new
Mhm.
relationship or new opportunity as well. Um,
Yeah,
I think.
encourage them to get involved in activities in their new school, and they're going to meet new people. That would be the
Yeah.
first step.
Have you ever found them doing that comparison thing that they would maybe do and keep saying, like, well, in my old school, dot, 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 people were like this, dot, 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 dot.
Mhm.
In the new school, the people are like this, da, 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 blah, 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 blah. And
Right,
they're running comparisons through their head frequently.
right. Mhm.
Um, and they're still, like I said, maybe with only a drive away from seeing their old friends. So they're hanging out with their old friends. At what point do you pressure them to make new friends or just say, you know what, the old friends are only 15 minutes away, let them hang out with the old friends?
15 minutes is really close. I've
That is
never
really
had
close.
it
I mean,
quite
I
that
still think it
close.
depends on whether it's like, is it actually adversely affecting them where they are if they're doing that? Like if they're actually like if they're actually kind of integrated or, the family's busy, so they're like, yeah, we don't mind if you spent the weekend with your with your friend, like that sounds fine to us. Or if they're making friends, maybe they're not like as close at their new school, but they still want to like hang out with their old friends, but it doesn't seem to be disruptive. I don't think that is when it's really a problem. I think when they're not giving anything a chance at the new placement, I think that's where you have to kind of you
Hmm.
might have to restrict it, even if that's difficult, or you might have to discourage them, like, hey, you can't spend every weekend with your old friends, or like you can't go out until 10 o'clock at night because you're out with your old friends from your old school, or you can't call your old host mom every single time you have a problem because you're not giving your new family a chance. I think that's when you have to kind of treat it like the old family was the natural family. Like we don't ever want the students to not talk to the natural family either, right? If when we or their friends back home, but we want them to like restrict it so it's not impeding their success elsewhere. So, and it could be hard, but I think we see even with the initial placement somewhere where students are having problem when they get over that hump that might
Mhm.
seem really difficult for them, often they're like, "Oh, this actually is really cool." Like maybe they had a new opportunity, maybe they could play a sport they couldn't play at their old school, or there's a different club, or they have a cool, really cool teacher that they, like at their new school, or they're, something they get to do with their host family that they couldn't do with their other host family.
Right, right. Or they make that one good friend that like invites them to everything, and
And then you get to say, hey, I got to experience like, you
two
know,
different cultures, right?
yeah, or like two different, it's kind of like you have two families now. Or you
Hmm.
know more people, or you get to say like you actually can say like you know enough about the US that you can almost say like, oh, it's not the same everywhere because I've experienced
Exactly.
two
Right.
different things. Even if they're close together, there can be two places,
Hmm.
two schools can be really close together and totally different culturally too, right?
Yeah.
They could have a totally different
Right.
school culture.
Yeah,
So,
For
and
sure. I
families.
have a town where there's two schools right there in this small town, but
hmm
it's still zoned different. And through the zoning, it has a different culture.